Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, how are you today? First of all, my name is Muhammad Azizi Azim bin Haris. I and my friend from the subject SKL 1493, Group Tertiary MQC1, want to talk about the primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. Before that, my group name is Gardenia Groups. Okay, first of all, when you want to know about the topic or subject, you must know the definition. Definition is a meaning. Okay, definition of primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. The distinction between primary, secondary, and tertiary sources hangs on how far from the original event or phenomenon the information source is created. Data from an experiment is a primary source. Secondary sources are one step removed from that. Secondary sources are based on or about the primary sources. Tertiary sources summarize or synthesis the research is in secondary sources. Okay, next, what are primary, secondary, and tertiary sources? Okay, let's see. Primary sources are created as close to the original event or phenomenon as it is possible to be. Okay, the secondary sources are one step removed from that. Secondary sources are based on or about the primary sources. The last is tertiary. Tertiary sources one future step removed from that. Tertiary sources summarize and synthesis the research in secondary sources.
Okay, now I want to tell you about primary sources. Primary sources is an original materials or sources, original sources of information before it has been analyzed. New ideas of finding that something new that someone get from their experience or from their research, and that's characteristic of primary sources. First-hand observation. First-hand observation is first-hand information or experience that someone gain or learn directly. Then the types of primary sources and their example. In history, for example, artifact. Artifact is an object such as a tool that was made in the past. Normally, we can get that artifact in the museum. Then the second one, original oral history. Oral history is the collection and study of information. Oral history is the collection and study of historical information that we by using the tape recording of interview with the people that having personal knowledge from the past event. And in science, the example is scientific experiment. Scientific experiment is one where a series of steps are developed to test a hypothesis. And the second one, journals and periodicals. Journals and periodicals is a main types of publication in which scientific research is reported. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you.
Secondary sources. What is a secondary sources? A secondary sources is anything that describes, interprets, evaluates, or analyzes information from primary sources, and examples includes: number one, books, articles, and documentaries that synthesize information on a topic. Number two, synopsis and descriptions of artistic works. Number three, encyclopedias and textbooks that summarize information and ideas. Number four, review and essays that evaluate or interpret something. When you cite the secondary sources, is usually not to analyze it directly. Instead, you will probably test its arguments against new evidence or use its ideas to help formulate your own. Example of source that can be secondary. Number one, documentaries. If you are researching the cause of World War, a recent documentary about the war is a secondary source. Number two, reviews and essays. If your paper is about the novels of Toni Morrison, a magazine review of one of her novels is a secondary source. Newspaper articles. If your aim is to analyze the government's economic policy, a newspaper article about a new policy is a secondary source.
Next, I will talk to you what is the tertiary sources. The tertiary sources offer information that has been gathered and distilled from primary and secondary sources. The tertiary sources are usually compilation from primary or secondary sources and help the researcher to select required primary or secondary source which will be the most relevant for his purpose. Tertiary sources are usually not credited to a particular author. These sources are the third in the order of appearance, and these sources are based on primary as well secondary source and serve as guide to primary as well secondary sources. The difference between secondary and tertiary sources is the tertiary sources is not present any new information and also not offer an analysis of information sources. There are many examples from the tertiary sources, but the most common examples from tertiary sources materials such as encyclopedias, dictionaries, almanacs, handbooks, and fact books also include the Wikipedia. There can be and often is an overlap between secondary and tertiary resources. What qualities define each is dependent on your institution and your specific disciplines. That's all from me.
Okay, I want to talk about comparison between primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. Okay. Firstly, I want to talk about primary sources. Primary sources is an original idea or original event. It also current with time of creation, and it is not interpretation. For example, the journey, the web. The web use a search engine to search for your topic and impress like primary sources, letters, newsreel, and the others. Secondly, I want to talk about secondary sources. It is interpretation, analysis, and commentary. We can get benefit from hindsight. For example, scientists publishes their result of experiment and researcher publishes their article discussion in the journal. Secondary sources can found in magazine, journal, and newspaper. Okay. Lastly, I want to talk about tertiary. Tertiary sources is distillation of information. It is based on primary and secondary sources. Both of them compiled in one book, like such as dictionary, textbook, and the others. Okay. This is just from me. Thank you very much.